Campers, it's another Wednesday. Tom Cagley and Jeremy Willets here to talk to you about mastering work intake. Tom, what's going on?
Hey, Jeremy, have you gotten that new class that we talked about the other day? Worked on didn't we ask to have this compass reading class expedited?
For the campers or for the instructors? Like how is that going to roll?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, so you want us to what should we cut out of the camper schedule then? Should we skip swimming this week and take this compass class instead, or arts and crafts? What are you thinking?
Well, I think we promised them arts and crafts and swimming also. Why don't we just take a little bit from everybody to get that done? Or maybe we'll just make swimming I got it. Swimming under the stars.
There it is. They can do it at night. I mean, I know that the pool doesn't have lights. I think we have some safety lights there sort of near the edge, but
I was thinking the lake. We could go out in the lake.
Well, it's summer, so they'll have ambient kind of lightning bug things, and I think the moon is full tomorrow night, so we could probably try it then. And that would probably couldn't they just take the compass class in the lake too when they're swimming?
Oh, you got this. Excellent. So let's stick this in expedited.
Yeah, let's do it. I'll after we're done here, I'll go tell the campers, make sure that they have their bathing suits ready to go, and then assuming it's not too cold tomorrow night and it's not raining, but we'll go out and do that.
And they have to march at the same time.
Yeah, so we're going to get their steps. We're going to get them in the pool, so we'll meet that requirement, and then we'll do the compass thing at the same time. Great.
Absolutely. So what we're doing is negotiating and using class as a service. And regardless, right? I mean, I'm a big fan of Kanban. I have right behind me in our library at the camp, we have the Kanban book of that's a Kanban maturity model. I use it also to, kill snakes.
And I'm sure you have the David Anderson book back there somewhere too, if you rummage around. That was one that I know changed my life quite a bit. I was a very Scrum-centric person until I picked up that David Anderson book and gave it a read.
But they all have classes of a service in there. There is sometimes a downside to classes of service.
Yeah. There is. It's one of our 8 work intake problems that we've been spending these summer camp sessions going through. So this is number 6. And so we'll spend time today talking to you about classes of service. I think we'll tell some stories. And then when we're done, we'll go talk to the campers about doing 5 things at once.
Hey, multitasking.
Yeah. It's not a myth. It's a reality.
Well, unless they drown. And that would be bad. So, I mean, it's class of service. If you pick up the Kanban book of knowledge, read the Anderson book, read any of the books, it's a mechanism, right, for dealing with different urgencies, different priorities, and doing it in hopefully a systematic way. I have written and have done any number of Kanban boards with an expedited lane, at least until about 5 years ago. And then you will have to make me do that going forward. We'll talk about why I now see this as scary.
Yeah. As I was thinking about this session, Tom, I was sort of hearkening back to some of my early days working with Kanban teams. And I distinctly remember back in the days of physical boards before we threw all of our work into electronic tools, I vividly remember, taking the painter's tape and making sure that top lane was clean. It was the expedited lane. And so I remember working with this team. It was my first Kanban team. And as I'm working with them, what I inevitably noticed was this pattern where we would start the week, or even maybe a 2-week period. We'd come up with the list of things that we thought we needed to do. We'd prioritize it, and then inevitably what would happen is things would start showing up in that expedited lane. And I'll never forget the manager of this team at the time. The company that I was working for at the time. Everybody had all the managers had cell phones, right? So we all had company cell phones, and it was really easy if somebody wanted to talk to you because the address book all synced up. They would just scroll through the address book and hit your number. And so I vividly remember there were times when we would be doing stand-up, right? We'd be doing stand-up, and this manager's phone would ring. And he had a special ringtone for calls that he received from the CTO. It played a Lady Gaga song that was the name of this engineering manager. So he knew that if the device in his pocket was playing this particular song, it was the CTO of the company on the line. And I remember there being instances where he would get calls in the middle of DSU and he'd walk back after taking the call in private, and we would magically have an item in the expedited lane for this team.
So what happens? What happens when stuff gets in that expedited lane?
Yeah, it was in this particular instance. It was an opportunity. It was an opportunity for the team to, almost have.
I love that term, opportunity.
It's a little bit of HR speak. It was an opportunity for the team to examine the work that they were doing, to understand the priorities of this particular C-level executive, but then to also have a conversation about how those priorities of that particular person factored into the work that they thought they had to do. So I can't tell you that every instance was negative. I think there were instances of this where it was the right thing to put an item in the expedited lane. But it also sort of in the big picture gave permission to this particular C-level executive that anything he wanted to have done, he could just pick up the phone, call this particular person, and it would magically make its way to the top of the board.
Again, prima facie, the idea of an expedited lane isn't bad.
Right.
And in Kanban, where you can be doing daily replenishment, things move across the board, you break them up into small chunks, you do all that kind of stuff and it moves across. Daily replenishment allows stuff to go into that expedited lane without having a significant ripple effect.
Right.
In scenarios where work goes into that expedited lane and other work either has to happen at night, like our wonderful campers, or you have to steal resources from all the rest of it, there's a ripple effect. And that ripple effect, that expedited thing might be just fine, but everything else doesn't end up being just fine.
Yeah, everything else might be in jeopardy. So you have to know what that expedited lane is going to be used for, and you have to understand how to use it. It's the old Spider-Man with great power comes great responsibility thing. Absolutely. If you're going to put that on your board, you've got to be aware of how it's being used. You've got to reflect on how it's being used. You probably should keep some data on how it's being used too. You probably should put together maybe a flow distribution kind of thing. I know we'll talk solutions here at the very end, but I think one of the really healthy practices for a Kanban team with one of these lanes is to understand how much work you have that's hitting that lane.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And what the ramifications of it hitting that lane are. So, Jeremy, when you've seen organizations use an expedited lane, but use the expedited lanes to shove an extra gallon in a 10-gallon hat without making conscious choices, what's the outcome that you've seen?
Well, first and foremost, I think people get kind of confused. I think the teams and the people doing the work can get sort of confused because, it's almost the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 boss problem we talked about previously. It's like, well, if certain roles and certain people have the ability to shove things either into our already full bag or shove things to the top of our bag, then what do we need? Why are we spending time prioritizing our backlog? Why do we have maybe a product ownery kind of person prioritizing our backlog if some other role is going to just jump in and trump that? So I think one of the things that I've seen is a complete lack of trust sometimes too. Can be another one that can get lost a little bit. Trust in a process or trust that people are making right decisions on behalf of the team or on behalf of the work. Yeah,
that's a biggie, and that's absolutely something to remember. One of the more interesting problems that I've seen this wrestle with is that when stuff gets shoved in and there is no give and take.
Yes.
I mean, again, people generally want to do the right thing. They want to seem like they're being team players. They try to make stuff happen. And in that case, not only is, the stuff that stuff that gets impacted being, affected, but in general, if they're cutting corners in one place, they're generally cutting corners in pretty much every places just to get it all done. Again, not because they're bad, but the level of technical debt goes up substantially. Right. And then in the long run, you talked about trust in the process and trust in leadership and things like that, but trust in the team goes down. That's that team. And unfortunately, I've been that team where we ended up having a run of, and I think we ascribed it to bad luck, but we had a run where we ended up creating a fair amount of technical debt to get stuff done and then had to pay it back later. We were that team that created a lot of poop.
Yeah. Let's go to the next slide then and talk about some of the diagnosis kinds of questions.
Absolutely.
So we've followed a similar format for these summer camps in that we talk about the dysfunction, but we talk about how to diagnose if some of this is happening. And this is not necessarily, some of these are more obvious than others, some of these problems. This is not one that's necessarily going to be obvious. So if I think back to my early days working with Kanban teams, I didn't know enough about the whole expedited concept to think to myself, gee, you know what? Maybe I should be keeping track of how often requests go in here. Or gee, maybe I should keep track of how much work that we think we're going to do in a week or 2 weeks isn't getting done because we're investing time on this expedite work that's coming in. That's definitely a lesson that I have learned over the years, and it's definitely something that if I were working with a Kanban team now, I would be very focused on. I would also try and work with a team to define what it means to be an expedited piece of work and come to a common definition. I know we've talked about common language quite a bit on these calls. I think coming to a common definition so that we have clarity about what we mean when we put something in that expedited lane, I think that would be very healthy as well.
And a common understanding of what happens when something goes in. I mean, who is it? I mean, part of, and having leveraged these kinds of scenarios more than once, I mean, knowing who is the culprit, I think, is also helpful. Who's allowed to put, things in the expedited lane? Obviously, if the system is down, if you've just shipped a major security
CrowdStrike. Yes, Tom, say it.
Okay, well, you did for me. I mean, if that's happened, well, you know what? All things are off. You have to make it right. You have to go out and get stuff done. Everything comes out, but that's a given mechanism. So who can stuff things in that? And part of diagnosing is actually going and watching, listening to the words. And again, I think prima facie, just because you have a expedited lane as a specific class of service, I don't think that's necessarily bad, assuming that you're handling it well. I once saw a team, and this is actually a negative. I saw a team say, you know what? We know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we get at least a half a dozen significant problem tickets a day. And so therefore we have to hold back resource to deal with this. And again, they live in an extremely complex environment where if something is down for any length of time, there's a potential for people to die. It's that kind of thing. So it's not trivial, the fact that they have that problem. But they set aside, they said, you know what, we can forecast at least a big chunk of this, and we can set aside people to deal with it as it happens. Well, lo and behold, a manager came through and saw this and said, you're not, it's that fallacy of 100% utilization. Everybody has to have 100%. So they crammed in a whole lot more work, and, obviously stuff happened and other things fell through. And then the team caught heck in terms of not delivering when they said they were going to deliver. But they had lost control of their expectations. Now, the other thing to look at that we didn't talk about when we wrote the book is some people, I don't know, it's sort of like they become obsessed with classes of service. Yeah. So it isn't just a normal set of work and expedited. It's normal set of work. It's project work. It's enhancement work. So you have 18 classes of service, and you need an AI and 14 project managers to actually run it. Way the heck, they got more overhead running their Kanban board than they actually do doing the work. It can get out of hand.
Yeah, I wonder, I know we talk a lot about team level challenges in regards to this, but I wonder about higher level concepts. So portfolio management, I know you and I are both very familiar with the Scaled Agile framework, and I'm thinking in my head about some of the Kanban systems there. I don't remember a class of service concept at high level, portfolio level, or train level. And I would guess it's because something like that could be very, very disruptive to lots and lots of people and lots of teams.
I am sure that if something very dramatic happened, then you would have to make a choice.
Of course.
But I think it boils down to that at that level. If I were an enterprise level Kanban, or a portfolio at a division, or even a department, if someone wanted to rearrange stuff, that means people have to stop working on stuff. And work is not directly fungible. You can't you can't be writing user tests for an enhancement that's going in next week, put that down for 3 or 4 weeks, and then pick it back up and expect to hit a state of flow instantaneously. Heck, I wouldn't be able to even, probably remember what I was doing. It would take a while to reread that. It's like trying to read a compass.
Yeah. So I mean, any changes outside the team in terms of like a class of service, if there are emergent large chunks of work that need to be done, I mean, it's again going to be incredibly disruptive potentially to lots and lots of teams. So think about the team level picture that we painted and how disruptive it can be to a team when they get a new piece of work. Think about how disruptive it could be when an enterprise gets a new piece of work that needs to be acted upon very quickly.
What do you do? So let's continue to talk through this at this point.
Yeah, we haven't put in many music lyrics, I think, in these presentations at all. And I figured this was an interesting one, if for nothing else, and it's sort of philosophical. I mean, it's a lyric from Come As You Are by Nirvana. It's like, and this made me think of classes of service, because it's like so much of classes of service is about perception and how much you actually need to go get something done. It's about perception on both sides, though. It's about the perception of the asker, but also the perception of the team. And so for whatever reason, as I was thinking about classes of service, expediting work, this particular line popped into my head.
Do you think classes of service can allow the choice to be yours?
Maybe. It depends if you have multiple things in that classes of service column. And it also depends, too, on how open the person requesting something is to having a conversation about choice, or whether it literally is, as you described earlier, cramming it in.
Pairing Kurt Cobain up with, and I've never heard Peter Drucker sing. Maybe I'll ask Amazon Music if they have any Peter Drucker songs. Efficiency, which is doing the thing right, is irrelevant. Doing the right thing, things right, is irrelevant until you work on the right things. as I read through this, I very nearly actually put that as my screensaver for a while. I mean, it is really, again, it boils down to goes back to the idea of prioritization and sequencing that we've talked about so many different times.
Yep.
We have to do the right things, then we can decide, to whether they have to be done fast, or whether we focus on something else, some other attribute of getting the work. It is a balance. As a leader, as a manager, as anyone in that sort of run of different roles, making those choices has to be done in a consistent and effective way, and it can't be capricious.
It does, and it has to consider context too. So in the story I told a little bit earlier, it's like I also remember instances where the CTO, who was calling the manager to get work injected for this particular team in an expedite lane, would then come to that same manager, a month later, 2 months later, and give him the old, "I thought your team was doing that. Why aren't you done with it yet?" And it's like, I don't know that particular manager ever had the gumption to say, "Well, it's because you keep giving us expedite items to work on." But I think the reality of the situation was you kept giving us expedite items to work on. So this other thing that you probably wanted, that was in some regards bigger and maybe even more valuable, didn't get done because you kept coming to us and asking us to drop everything and do this particular thing.
That's where a cumulative flow diagram would be really an interesting picture to be able to have that conversation. I know the people that you're talking about, or at least some of the people that you're talking about. And I don't know that would have been a useful discussion given their personalities, but if they were different personalities, being able to visualize the impact is an extraordinary big deal.
Yeah, it will. And I know we're going to move on to another slide, but I have worked with executive leaders in the past who have refused to inject work into teams' backlogs using that expedite concept because they understand the ramifications. I don't know how they learned, whether it was some of the philosophy that maybe I was espousing about why you don't do that, but I've worked with people who understand the potential ramifications of doing that. So when they have requests, they think about the requests, they work it through the official channels, and hopefully come to positive resolutions for everybody in the organization.
Hey, Jeremy, as one camper to another, how did you learn not to put your hand in the running garbage disposal?
Well, I heard tell that it would be very painful, so I decided not to, validate that assumption on my own.
I don't think all leaders, managers, and I've been a middle and senior manager more than once in my career. I don't think all of us need to understand that we can't do something because we did it and it blew our hand off. I mean, the reality is we could read the book. We have had these conversations. It makes logical sense. You can't just continue to wave your hand in the air and say, handle it. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So let's talk about how to get better, shall we? Let's talk about breaking the cycle. So as we're fond of saying, you've got to get out and see what's going on. I think number 2 is a really imperative thing. So we talked earlier about understanding how your Kanban system is working, whether we're talking about a team level Kanban, a portfolio Kanban, an enterprise Kanban. You got to understand how work is flowing. Maybe it's that cumulative flow diagram that Tom talked about earlier. Maybe it's a flow distribution concept, but you got to understand how classes of service and that expedite concept are impacting your work. So it could be as simple as understanding how often do we get expedited items. Tom, you just mentioned working with a team and you said that they were getting 6 per day, right? So that's like a base level understanding of how much work you're actually getting that qualifies as an expedite item. But then understanding how that impacts the rest of the work is very necessary too.
Well, that changes a lot of different approaches. That team, because they had some other issues going on that I described, but one of the things they did is that they really focused on daily replenishment as a mechanism. They were doing some degree of planning at a larger scale, but they really focused very hard. Again, they were an ops team on their daily replenishment because stuff happened.
Yeah, they had to. They had to. I mean, a daily replenishment sounds totally appropriate if you're getting 6 items a day that are just drop everything and do it. It seems like a daily replenishment would be about right.
So one of the things when we talk about visualizing the flow, I mean, we talked about a couple of different metrics that you could use to actually monitor it, but another idea to consider, and that is if you're using a very simplified Kanban board, perhaps it makes sense to break that down a little more so that you can actually see where bottlenecks and constraints are, so that you can actually address those and reduce the need to expedite things when things get held up in bottlenecks or whether or not you have a constraint. So visualizing your flow is not only how fast the stuff's moving and what's moving, but the process that you work through, where you're using different classes of service. As Jeremy put it, understand the impact, because there always is. Suggest changes and have a retrospective. If it's not working, keep doing it or not.
And one of the things actually, Tom, that you can retrospect on, and I've done this in my career when I've worked with Kanban teams, for the items that actually make it into the expedite lane, when they're done, talk about whether it was really necessary to put them there. Talk about, and that can be potentially an uncomfortable conversation to have. Like, looking back on what we know now and knowing that we had to drop everything to do this piece of work, was that the right decision to have made?
There are still 2 more summer camp sessions left.
Two.
We'll be back at our earlier time next week.
We will be back at our earlier time next week. So yeah, we've got 2 more, one on control and one on yes-itis, which again are patterns 7 and 8. Those are our problems of work intake. So we're looking forward to doing those 2 sessions to finish up summer camp. And then, like, we get to ditch the Hawaiian shirts and the kids get to go home. You get to go back to school. I get to go back to school. And, summer's over, I guess, at that point, right?
Yeah, we got to go back to our real lives. Knock on wood. And in our real lives, we've obviously written a book on this, Mastering Work Intake. Jeremy and I would love you to buy a copy of the book. Read it. We're going to do a book club later on this year. If you want to just try it out, go to the J. Ross website, and very frankly, you can get a couple of the first couple of chapters free to take a read. First couple of chapters are pretty darn good. We did a lot of good work on that. The rest of it, no, I'm not kidding. and then we do have workshops to really go into this stuff in depth, give you hands-on experience dealing with it, and that's over at Miro. So the barcode, the QR code under buy this book, or above buy this book, buy the book. The one below workshop information is our Maven page. Go over there, register, and we'll let you know in the early fall when we're doing our next tranche of public classes.
Yeah, I think all that's left, Tom, is for us to figure out what time you're walking down to the lake tonight to do the compass class and swimming.
The moon comes up at about 11:30. It's about 3/4 of the way full. I saw it this morning, was out running. So let's about 11:30. I think compass class and swimming. Let's 11:30 at night. It'd be swimming in the stars.
All right, that sounds awesome.
Have a wonderful week.
Bye, folks.